married. Relatives later shared that my arrival was unexpected. Initially, life was comfortable. However, as I grew older and lost my childhood charm, my parents seemed less interested in spending time with me. Both were deeply committed to their jobs and a business they started together. Their business was their priority, and I often felt like an afterthought. The rest of my family, like my grandparents, lived far away in different states. I barely knew them until I was much older. As a child, I was mostly raised by television and my teachers. Before I turned 13, birthdays were rarely celebrated with my parents. They would simply hand me money and tell me to buy whatever I wanted. The same happened during Christmas and even back-to-school shopping. At 10, I convinced them to buy an artificial Christmas tree that I could assemble and disassemble yearly. Without it, we wouldn't have had a tree at all. If I had to describe my parents, they were the kind of people who dressed in black, drank wine frequently, and often frowned at others. The last time I saw them, they looked and behaved the same, except my dad now wore a hat all the time. I once asked if I could work part-time at their business, but they said there were no openings. They could have just told me they didn't want me there. As soon as I turned 18, my parents declared I was an adult and needed to move out quickly. I had a part-time job during high school but hadn't saved nearly enough for college. They gave me a formal notice to vacate within 30 days after graduation. They didn't even help me move. I had to rely on a friend's father who owned a truck. I ended up in a rundown apartment, working retail jobs. I lacked real-life skills and couldn't afford college. A few months later, I was fired because my boss disliked me and nitpicked over trivial issues. I don't even remember the specifics now. The boss mistreated others too, and a few of us reported it. After an investigation, the boss was fired for multiple reasons, including stealing cigarettes. Corporate wouldn't rehire me but changed my record to say I was laid off instead of fired to protect my resume. Soon after, I lost all my money due to poor management and unstable work. I lost my apartment and, when I asked my parents for help, they refused. I had to sleep in a tent in someone's backyard during winter. All my friends had left for college, some out of state, while I struggled to make ends meet with odd jobs. A neighbor of my parents found out about my situation and took me in temporarily to avoid freezing. She helped me pressure my parents into giving me contact information for estranged family members. They reluctantly provided it but told me never to contact them again. Relatives from my dad's side were thrilled to hear from me. They hadn't seen me since I was a baby. I was their only grandchild. When my grandparents learned what had happened, they immediately flew me to live with them. They essentially adopted me. My parents didn't even show up to pick me up from the airport, despite being invited. I didn't speak to them for nearly a decade. My grandparents were furious at how my parents had treated me and disowned them by removing them from their wills. People who knew my parents said they were upset but claimed it didn't matter because they were wealthy and didn't need anything from my grandparents. They were wrong. Within a year of living with my grandparents, I saved enough to attend community college. My grandfather helped me secure a good job and earn an associate's degree. Later, my grandparents offered to sell me their house so they could retire in Arizona. The cold weather was worsening my grandmother's health, so they wanted to move somewhere warmer. They sold me the house for a third of its value, and it will be paid off in a few years. Due to my job, I travel frequently and might not be home for weeks. This doesn't bother me. I don't have pets, a partner, or other commitments. I plan to focus on those things in a few years. I don't want to be alone forever. Then, in late 2020, I returned home after 2 weeks away to find a white van with my parents' business logo parked in my yard. I was about to call the police when I saw them inside my house. They had broken in and were living there, greeting me as if we were old friends. They refused to leave, claiming it was still my grandparents' house, even though I owned it. They knew nothing about my life since they had kicked me out with no life skills a decade earlier. We argued, but they wouldn't budge. I locked myself in my room and called the police. When the officers arrived, my parents lied, saying they had lived there long enough to establish residency. Without camera footage or neighbor testimonies, it was my word against theirs. They even claimed we had a verbal lease, and my mother cried to sell the story. The police called it a family dispute and advised me to file for eviction. The process dragged on due to the pandemic. Meanwhile, my parents lived rent-free in my house, mocking me. They revealed their business had failed, forcing them to sell everything. The van and a few belongings were all they had left. They both found new jobs, my dad as a delivery driver and my mom in sales, but only paid me $100 monthly for utilities, acting as if I owed them for raising me. Stressed, I called my grandparents, who were furious but couldn't intervene. My parents stayed, trying to take over my home, rearranging furniture and demanding the master bedroom. I stood my ground, reminding them they had no right to anything after abandoning me. 4 months later, in early 2021, the court finally ordered them to leave within 30 days. They had no legal claim to the house. After the ruling, they guilt-tripped me, but I held firm. On March 2nd, they finally moved into a tiny, run-down studio apartment in another city, a cruel irony, given my struggles at 18. Before leaving, they asked for the guest room's bed, dresser, and TV. I refused. As they drove away, I changed the locks, relieved they were gone for good. Later, I learned they had started a new business using an inheritance from my maternal grandfather, who had passed away. My mom's side of the family, much like my parents, showed no interest in me. My dad's family, however, fully supported me and cut ties with my parents. Now, I'm considering selling my house and moving closer to my grandparents in Arizona. I hate winter, a reminder of my time in a tent. I'm also installing cameras to ensure my parents never return. They're dead to me, and I vow never to repeat their mistakes if I ever have children. After my parents were finally gone, I took a deep breath and began reclaiming my space. I scrubbed every corner of the house, as if trying to erase their presence. The guest room, where they had stayed for months, felt tainted, so I repainted the walls and rearranged the furniture. It was my way of moving forward. For weeks, I kept expecting them to show up unannounced, but they didn't. I later found out through mutual acquaintances that they were fully focused on their new business. Apparently, my maternal grandmother's inheritance had given them a fresh start, and they were determined to rebuild their lives, just as they had before. Meanwhile, I threw myself into work and home improvements. I installed security cameras around the property, something I should have done long ago. My grandparents, now settled in Arizona, checked in on me regularly. They urged me to consider selling the house and moving closer to them, but I was hesitant. Despite everything, this house represented stability, a place I had earned after years of struggle. Then, one evening, I received a call from an unknown number. It was my mother. Her voice was calm, almost detached, as she said, "We just wanted you to know we're doing well." I didn't respond. She continued, "We're not asking for anything. We just thought you should hear it from us." I hung up. The call left me unsettled. Were they trying to provoke me? Or was this some twisted attempt at reconciliation? I blocked the number and decided not to dwell on it. But a part of me couldn't help but wonder if they expected gratitude, or worse, forgiveness. A few months passed without incident. I started dating someone, cautiously at first, but it felt good to let someone new into my life. My partner knew bits and pieces of my past but never pushed for details. They respected my boundaries, something my parents never had. Then, one afternoon, I came home to find an envelope taped to my front door. No postage, no return address, just my name handwritten in my father's distinct, sharp script. Inside was a check for $5,000 and a note. "For the time we stayed with you. No strings attached. Asterisk." I stared at it, my hands shaking. Was this an apology? A bribe? A way to ease their guilt? I didn't cash it. Instead, I tore it up and threw it away. If they thought money could fix what they'd broken, they were even more delusional than I'd thought. My grandparents supported my decision. "You don't owe them anything," my grandfather said firmly. "Not your time, not your energy, and certainly not your forgiveness. I knew he was right. But as much as I tried to move on, their shadow lingered. Then, another twist, my parents' new business began struggling. Rumors spread that they'd cut corners, and customers were complaining. A part of me wanted to feel vindicated, but mostly, I just felt tired. Their failures weren't my victories, their lives were no longer my concern. I made my choice. I listed the house for sale. When the offer came in, I accepted it without hesitation. My grandparents helped me find a small place near them in Arizona. As I packed my things, I realized I wasn't running away, I was choosing peace. On the day I handed over the keys, I took one last look around. This house had been my refuge, but it was also a battleground. Now, it was someone else's story. I drove away without looking back. Epilogue ***. It's been 2 years since I moved. I'm closer to my grandparents than ever, and I've started taking online courses to finish my degree. My partner and I are talking about the future, maybe even a family of our own someday. As for my parents, I heard through the grapevine that their business failed again. They're living in my maternal grandmother's old house, but I don't know for sure, and I don't care to find out. Some wounds don't heal cleanly. But they do scar over. And scars, at least, don't hurt forever.